The old ministers watched from the edges of the throne room. Their beards were white. Their hands were stained with decades of imperial ink. Behind them sat the Empress Dowager, motionless, her eyes two slivers of pale stone. They all saw it happen at the same instant. The emperor turned his head. In the Han court, the emperor's gaze was the most expensive thing in the world, and it had just landed on a stranger, a boy with skin like rice paper, hands that had never gripped a plow, a brush, or a sword. In one breath, he became the most powerful person in China. In the next, the most hunted. This is not a love story. This is the entry of a slow poison into the bloodstream of a dynasty. The court did not care who shared the emperor's pillow. They cared about the golden tiger seal, the token that moved 1,000,000 soldiers, being slipped into the palm of a boy who could not name a single Xiongnu tribe. They cared about granaries built to feed provinces during flood years, being emptied to line a pavilion with polished bronze mirrors. Also, a beautiful nobody from the countryside could admire himself. In the silence of the throne hall, ministers swallowed their rage. Generals clenched their jaws. They had given sons to the frontier. They had buried brothers in the northern dust. And now they stood still, while the empire they bled for was carved up to please one man's hunger. The Han court did not find these favorites by accident. It manufactured them, bred them, trained them into living weapons aimed at the emperor's own ministers. Boys so flawless, so dependent, so impossible to refuse, they became a sickness no general could fight with a sword. This is the story of that sickness, and the violent cure an empire chose to swallow. Tell us in the comments which city and country you are watching from right now. If unfiltered history is what you came for, hit subscribe and stand with the project. You are watching Ancestral, the best dark history channel in the world. A man on a tired horse rides into a village in the commandery of Ding, 3 weeks south of the capital. Nothing has happened here in 100 years. The dust does not settle on him. It settles around him as if it recognizes the trade. He is not a tax collector. He is not a recruiter for the legions sent against the Xiongnu. He carries no military banner. He carries silver, wrapped in oiled cloth, tied at his belt. His trade is human flesh, but not the kind that digs canals along the Yellow River or dies in the snow north of the Great Wall. He is hunting something rarer. The historian Ban Gu, writing in the Book of Han a century later, would describe these men with a single character that meant both merchant and hunter. The court paid them well. The court never named them in official documents. He sits in the village square for 3 days. He watches. He ignores the loud boys. He ignores the strong ones. He ignores the clever ones. He is looking for the quiet boy in the corner, the one with the still hands, the one with a face the sun has not yet ruined, and eyes that already look a little empty. When he finds the boy, the transaction takes less than an hour. A pouch of silver, perhaps 30 liang, pressed into a father's palm. Enough to buy a pair of oxen, enough to pay the land tax for 10 years. A promise of silk and rice, and a life inside palace walls. The mother does not cry where the buyer can see her. She knows better. The boy climbs onto the cart. He does not look back. His childhood ends on that road, between 2 rice paddies, with a stranger holding the reins. He is no longer a son. He is raw material. This trade ran through every dynasty of the Han period, but it accelerated under specific reigns. Emperor Wen kept a favorite named Tong, who was given a copper mountain in Sichuan to mint his own currency. Emperor Wu kept Han Yan, who was permitted to ride beside the imperial chariot until the Empress Dowager Do had him stripped and beaten to death in her courtyard in 134 BC. Emperor Ai, who would later strain the dynasty almost to breaking, kept the most famous of them all. The boys in the cart were the inheritance of that history. They were being delivered into a system that already had a long appetite and a long memory. The cart travels for 16 days. It arrives at a compound that appears on no official map of the empire. The men who run it call it the Jade Workshop. From the outside, it looks like a place a retired minister would buy to end his days writing poetry. Curved tile roofs glazed in deep green. A garden of white river stones raked into spirals every morning before dawn. Koi drifting under a wooden bridge. Lattice screens cut from blackwood, so dense they swallow sound. It is a beautiful lie. Inside, the floors are polished stone, so cold the bone aches by the second hour after waking. The walls are bare. No paintings, no calligraphy, no color. Even the lamps are made of dark bronze, designed to give light without warmth. The silence inside the Jade Workshop is engineered, the way a sword is engineered. This place was built for one purpose: to erase a human being. On the first day, the boy is stripped in a stone hall lit by a single oil lamp. His village clothes are thrown into a furnace at the end of the corridor. He watches them burn through a grate in the floor. The smell of his own burning cotton stays in his nose for a week. His hair is cut by a man who does not speak. His name is taken from him in a ledger he never sees. From this moment on, he is a number stitched in dark thread onto a plain silk robe. Every robe in the building is identical. Every boy is identical. Difference is the enemy here, and difference is hunted down and killed. A bronze bell wakes them at the hour of the tiger, 2 hours before dawn. They eat one bowl of thin rice congee with a single pickled plum. Never two. A hungry body bows easily. A hungry body does not run. The training begins before sunrise, in a hall the masters call the Pavilion of Still Water. They are taught to stand without moving. Not for minutes, for hours. A statue of a boy in a cold stone hall, breathing slow through the nose. If an eyelid flickers, a master steps forward. He does not strike the face. The face is the product. He uses a thin bamboo cane on the soles of the feet. The pain rises through the legs and lodges itself behind the eyes. The boy cannot walk for 2 days. He cannot scream, because screaming is a punishable sound, recorded in the daily ledger and answered with a second beating. No mark is left. The bruise is internal. That is the lesson. They learn to pour wine without a sound, from a height of exactly 1 chi, so the stream catches the lamplight. They learn to walk so that the silk over the floor makes no whisper. They learn the exact angle the head must tilt when an older man speaks, and a second angle lower by 3 degrees for when an older woman speaks. Every gesture is rehearsed 1,000 times. They are being shaped into living porcelain. Sleep becomes a weapon turned against them. They are kept awake for 3 days at a stretch, made to recite passages from the Book of Documents and the Book of Odes until the characters lose meaning and become a long single sound. In that state, the mind softens. The old self begins to peel away like wet paper from a window. Then, the new programming is poured in. 10 hours a day of calligraphy, kneeling on a flat board with the brush held vertical. They do not write their own thoughts. They never will. They copy the same court documents, the same edicts of Emperor Gozu, the same poems of Sima Xiangru, until the hand moves without the brain attached. They memorize the lineage of every emperor back to the founding of the Han in 202 BC. They memorize the rank of every minister currently breathing in Chang'an. They memorize the correct address for a marquis, a general of the right, a palace attendant, a concubine of the third grade, a foreign envoy from the kingdom of Dian. Their minds become filing cabinets for protocol. Nothing else fits inside. The face of a mother, the name of a dog, the smell of the village kitchen at the hour of the rooster. These things are pushed out to make room for the names of court officials. They are not learning. They are being overwritten. The goal is a mirror. A mirror has no memory. A mirror has no opinion. A mirror reflects only the emperor. There were instructors at the Jade Workshop whose names survive in fragments. A woman called Madame Wei is mentioned in a fragmentary text from the late Western Han, described as the keeper of deportment, a former palace dancer who had been blinded in one eye after a failed assassination attempt against a princess. She taught the boys to walk by tying jade pendants to their hips. If the pendants clinked, she struck the back of the knees with a wooden rod. There was a man known only as the eunuch of the 7th Hall, who supervised the recitations and who had himself been a favorite, decades earlier, of a prince executed for treason. He had survived by becoming an instructor. He taught the boys that survival was a technique, not a gift. There is a war waged on the body itself. Each morning, their faces are painted by attendants who wear gloves of thin silk. A thick white paste, called hu fen, ceruse, is spread across the cheeks, the forehead, the throat. It is made from lead carbonate, ground in stone mortars. The boys do not know this. The masters do. The recipe came from the artisans of the state mint, who used the same compound in coin work. Cinnabar paints the lips red. Cinnabar contains mercury. The boys taste it every time they speak. Day after day, year after year, the lead seeps through the skin into the blood. It settles in the bones. It coats the inside of the skull. The boys develop small tremors in the fingers. They learn to hide them by keeping the hands folded inside long sleeves. They develop dull aches in the joints. They learn to walk through the pain. They develop a fog in the mind that makes rebellion difficult to even imagine. That is the point. The makeup is not just disguise, it is sedation. The mask of beauty is a chemical leash. Their diet completes the work. The herbalists at the Jade Workshop know exactly what to feed a body to delay its development. Specific roots, including a preparation of pueraria that the court physicians later described in a treatise dated to the reign of Emperor Cheng. Specific teas brewed with licorice and a measured trace of aconite. Almost no meat. The boys remain slender. Their voices stay high. Their jawlines never sharpen. They are held at the edge of manhood year after year, and never permitted to cross it. The court fetishized this frozen state. The boys lived inside it like insects in amber. Outside the walls of the Jade Workshop, the empire was burning through silver. The treasury, which had held 40 billion cash coins at the death of Emperor Wu in 87 BC, was drained again and again by court favorites who carried no military rank and no administrative title. The Yellow River flooded in 29 BC, drowning 4 commanderies. Famine followed. The court still found the funds to gild a private pavilion for a single boy from the countryside. Officials in the secretariat wrote memorials in protest. The memorials were filed. The pavilion was finished on schedule. This is the cage being built around the empire while the boys are being shaped inside it. 4 out of every 10 boys who entered the Jade Workshop did not walk out alive. Some collapsed during the standing drills and could not be revived. Some lost their minds during the sleep deprivation and began screaming at walls in the small hours of the morning until a master came with a length of silk cord. Some died slow from the lead, coughing black mucus into a bowl. Some simply stopped eating one day and were found cold on their mat the next morning, the number on their robes staring at the ceiling. The masters did not call this failure. They called it quality control. A flawed product was disposed of at night. The body was wrapped in a reed mat, carried out the western gate of the compound, and dropped into a pit of quicklime cut into the hillside. By morning, there was nothing left to identify. No bones, no teeth, no name to bury. The pit was covered with fresh earth, and a new mat was laid out in the empty sleeping space. The other boys watched these disappearances in silence. They understood the lesson. Each of them was replaceable. Each of them was a draft, and every draft could be thrown away. The ones who survived were not the strongest. They were not the cleverest. They were the most thoroughly hollowed out. The boys whose interior had been scraped clean and refilled with court protocol and quiet obedience. They were vessels, beautiful, silent, ready to be poured into. This is the kind of history that gets buried. It does not fit on a temple wall. It does not flatter the dynasty. It reveals a machine of cold engineering aimed at human souls, and most people prefer not to look at it. Here at Ancestral, we believe you came for the version that does not look away. If these stories matter to you, join The Lineage, our channel membership. You become part of the team that keeps this work alive, gets access to the inner circle, and stands behind every investigation we publish. Join the ranks. Help us keep digging. The last stage of the forging had a name. The Anointing, a boy who had survived everything, who had proven himself to be the perfect empty vessel, was led to a chamber he had never entered before. The Hall of the Opening Lotus. The walls were lacquered black. The ceiling was painted with the constellations as they were arranged on the night the founding emperor took the throne. His numbered robe was removed for the last time and burned in a brazier in the center of the floor. He watched the dark thread of his old identity curl into smoke. He was bathed in oils that smelled of sandalwood and clove. He was dressed in silk so fine it weighed almost nothing. Dragons curled across his sleeves with 5 claws each, a pattern that was a capital offense for anyone outside the imperial family to wear. Phoenixes spread across his back in gold thread. He was given a new name, something elegant, something poetic, a name chosen by an official of the imperial secretariat, not by a mother. The name was entered into a court register that would be sealed with red wax and stored in the archive at Weiyang Palace. His birth name was now a forbidden word. To speak it aloud, even once, was a death sentence under the law of lèse-majesté. He was led to a bronze mirror, polished by a craftsman who had spent 40 days on its surface. He looked into it. The boy from the dusty village in Dingtao was not there. The boy who had cried on the first night was not there. What looked back was a painted stranger with white skin and red lips and dark thread for eyes. He had been completed. He was walked through corridors he had never seen, lit by oil lamps set into niches at the height of a man's chest. The deeper he went, the more silent the halls became. Servants flattened themselves against the walls as he passed. Even they could not look at his face. He passed through the gate of the cinnabar bird, then the gate of the imperial way, then a third gate that had no name, guarded by 2 men who carried no visible weapon and bowed without raising their eyes. He stopped before a pair of bronze doors taller than 3 men, cast in a single piece during the reign of Emperor Wu, decorated with reliefs of clouds and tigers and the 4 directional spirits. Behind those doors, waited the imperial court of the Han. The ministers in their dark robes, the generals with their iron-studded belts, the Empress Dowager with her eyes of pale stone seated 3 steps below the throne, and the Son of Heaven himself, waiting on a dais covered in yellow silk, his fingers resting on the carved arm of the dragon seat. The bronze bell of the Jade Workshop rang one final time, far behind him, the last sound from the life that had made him. The doors began to swing open. His arrival was not an entrance. It was a curtain pulled back from a painting the court had been forced to wait for. When the bronze doors finished their slow arc, a line of light from the throne hall slid across the polished stone and caught the hem of his robe. He stepped forward. The court inhaled once and forgot to exhale. The minister reading the Southern Grain Report stopped mid-character. A general of the 3rd rank lowered his hand from his beard. A scribe near the eastern column let a brush drip ink onto a fresh scroll and did not notice. The drop spread into the character for harvest, and the scribe would be beaten for it that evening. Emperor Ai of Han looked up from a memorial concerning rice shipments from Jiangling. His eyes found the boy. They did not return to the page. The center of the Han universe shifted by 3 paces that morning. It moved off the dragon throne and onto the painted face of a young man from Yunyang named Dong Xian. The throne would never quite get him back. This was a declaration of war. It was delivered without a single word. The throne room itself was built to crush ambition into silence. The hall of the front court, Qiandian, stood at the heart of Weiyang Palace, on a platform of rammed earth 7 meters above the surrounding courtyards. Its roof beams were of Nanmu cedar, shipped up from Sichuan, along 1,000 miles of river. The columns were lacquered red and bound with bronze. The floor was polished black slate, oiled every morning before sunrise by attendants who worked on their hands and knees. A man entering that hall heard the sound of his own breathing before he heard anything else. That was the design. Into that designed silence, Dong Xian walked. The rise of Dong Xian is preserved in chapter 93 of the Book of Han, compiled by Ban Gu in the 1st century AD. The dates are exact. In 22 BC, he was a minor attendant in the Yellow Gate, a registrar with a salary of 200 bushels of grain per year. Then Emperor Ai, who had taken the throne in 7 BC at the age of 20, noticed him in a corridor between the front court and the inner apartments. Bangu records that the emperor stopped, asked his name, and from that hour kept him near. Within months, Dong Xian was promoted to palace attendant, Shizhong, a post that gave him direct access to the imperial bedchamber. Within a year, he was made Marquis of Gaoan, with a fief of 2,000 households in the commandery of Runan. By Worse BC, at the age of 21, he held the rank of Dasima, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Han. The promotion took him past men who had spent 40 years climbing the bureaucracy. His father, Dong Gong, a minor official from Yunyang who had once served as imperial censor at a county level, was appointed imperial counselor and then minister of works. His younger brother, Dong Quanxin, was made imperial cavalier attendant. His wife was permitted to enter the imperial harem at will, a privilege normally reserved for the emperor's own sisters. His sister was raised to the rank of Zhaoyi, second only to the empress in the harem hierarchy. The whole clan was lifted into the highest air of the empire within 30 months. The old guard watched the ladder of merit burn from the bottom up. Titles that other men paid for with frostbite on the northern marches, with sons buried in the sand of Dunhuang, with 3 decades of careful memorials to the throne, were handed to Dong Xian the way a man gives a child a sweet. The day the hatred crystallized, was the grand military review in the courtyard outside the Hall of Universal Peace. It was autumn of verse BC. The maples on the palace walls had turned the color of old blood. The generals stood in ranked formation, their lamellar armor lacquered black, their belts heavy with iron studs. The wind off the Wei River carried the smell of horse manure from the cavalry pens half a li away. Somewhere on the western wall, a sentry was striking a bronze gong to mark the hour. Some of these officers had fought at Yanran against the northern Xiongnu under Do Xian's predecessors. Some had survived the western region's campaigns that opened the route to Khotan. One of them, Wang Jia, served as chancellor, the highest civil office in the empire. He had lost 3 brothers in a single ambush near Juyan in 36 BC. He stood in the front rank with his hands at his sides and his jaw locked. They were ordered to kneel. Above them, on a raised platform beside the emperor, stood Dong Xian, 22 years old, dressed in the regalia of the Dasima. The robe was black with vermilion trim, the colors reserved for the highest military command. At his belt hung the golden tiger tally, Hufu, that could move 100,000 troops with a single half pressed into wax. The tally had been taken 3 weeks earlier from Wang Mang, the emperor's own uncle by marriage, who had been forced into retirement at his estate in Shindu. Wang Mang received the news of the tally's transfer while sitting in a pavilion overlooking his fish ponds. According to a fragment preserved in the Dongguan Hanji, he set down his cup, said nothing, and watched the carp for an hour. Then he wrote 3 letters. The letters do not survive. The men who received them do. The greaves of the generals hit the slate in a single rolling crash. The sound carried up the walls and bounced off the tiled roofs and came back as a dry echo. Some of them, men in their 60s, bit the inside of their cheeks until they tasted copper. The taste was a private anchor. It reminded them they were still alive, still themselves, still capable of remembering. They were kneeling to a boy who had never seen a sword drawn in anger. Chancellor Wang Jia did not bite his cheek. He kept his face neutral. He memorized the moment instead. Within the year, he would submit a memorial to the throne directly accusing Dongxian of corrupting the state. The memorial would cost him his life. He would die in prison in Tuidaluns, BC, refusing food for 20 days, his last recorded words being a quotation from the Book of Documents about ministers who failed to restrain their lords. In that courtyard, under the red maples, 1,000 silent oaths of vengeance were sworn. Wang Mang made one of them. He would keep it. The poison was not only political, it ran into the veins of the treasury. There was a precedent, and the court knew it by heart. A man named Tong, favorite of Emperor Wen, who reigned from 180 to 157 BC. Tong began as a yellow-capped boatman on the imperial lake at Shanglin. A dream brought him to the emperor's attention. Sima Qian preserves the story in chapter 125 of the records of the grand historian. The emperor dreamed he was climbing to heaven and could not reach the top step. A man in a yellow cap pushed him up from behind. He woke and walked to the lake. He found a boatman wearing the same cap, his belt tied at the back in the same knot. From that morning forward, they were rarely separated. A court physiognomist named Xu Fu examined Tong's face and announced he would die of starvation. The emperor laughed for a long time. He decided to break the prophecy with money. He gave Tong a mountain, a copper-bearing range in Yandao, in the commandery of Shu, in what is now Sichuan. With it came the right to mint coins privately, under license of the imperial seal. The mountain produced ore for 10 years without interruption. Caravans of pack mules moved the copper down the Min River to the smelteries at Linqiong. The Han state had built its authority on a controlled currency. The 5-ju coin, standardized under Emperor Wu in 118 BC, was the bone of the imperial economy. Now there was a second mint operating under private license. Deng Tong's coins flooded the markets of Chang'an. Merchants began to prefer them because they were heavier by half a fen than the state issue. They hoarded the heavy coins and spent the lighter ones. The accounts at the Ministry of Finance ran red. Prices for grain in the Central Plain rose by an average of 14% across 3 years, according to the price registers cited in the Treatise on Food and Money in the Book of Han. A boatman with a mountain had introduced a parallel state into the heart of the empire. When Emperor Wen died in 157 BC, the new Emperor Jing stripped Deng Tong of everything within a single season. The mountain was repossessed. The mints were sealed by imperial commissioners. Deng Tong's estate was confiscated to settle a fabricated tax debt. He died in a borrowed room in the southern wards of Chang'an with no food in the house. A relative left a single bowl of cold millet by the door. He could not lift it. The prophecy was kept. Every minister in Chang'an in 6 BC knew this story by memory. They watched Dong Xian receive estates in Henan, silk by the 1,000 bolts from the workshops at Lindsay, a horse and carriage permit that allowed him to enter the inner palace mounted, and a private palace under construction on the eastern slope of Mount Li, opposite the future site of his master's tomb. They counted the parallels. The favorite became a wall around the emperor. The emperor became the prisoner of his own wall. The Han imperial system depended on the flow of information. Bamboo strips bound with hemp cord arrived at the capital from every commandery, carried by relay couriers who changed horses every 30 li. Military dispatches from the wall reached Chang'an within 4 days of dispatch from Dunhuang. Tax records from the salt commissioners at Yanti arrived monthly. Reports from the governors of Liangzhou about Qiang tribal movements arrived weekly. This was the nervous system of an empire of 58 million people. According to the census of AD 2, Dongxian's presence severed the nerves. A minister carrying news that the Yellow River had broken its dikes near Puyang would arrive at the Bronze Horse Gate. A eunuch named Wu Hong, who controlled access during this period, would meet him in the antechamber. The emperor was indisposed. The emperor was studying calligraphy with the marquis. The emperor was at music in the hall of the cool breeze. The minister would stand on the cold floor of the antechamber, holding a scroll that contained, in dry characters, the death of villages. He would hear bamboo flutes through a lacquered wall. He would hear a young man laughing. He would leave with the scroll still sealed. In 4 BC, the dikes did break. 8 commanderies in the lower Yellow River Valley flooded. The Book of Han records that the displaced population exceeded 100,000 families. The granaries at Aokang and Jingxing sat full to the rafters. The orders to release them were never signed by the throne. Inside the palace, construction continued on the Marquis's pavilion of mirrors at Mount Li. The bronze sheets for the walls were polished by teams of 40 craftsmen working in shifts. The blame settled in the seething offices of the Imperial Secretariat on a single painted face. The inner court turned into a hunting ground. In Han politics, proximity to the Son of Heaven was the only true currency. Now that proximity was guarded by one young man who slept on the same mat as the emperor. The game changed. The objective was no longer access. The objective was removal. The attacks could not be open. Dongxian was sheltered by an absolute authority. So the war moved into the shadows. A cook in the inner kitchens of Weiyang Palace received a sum equal to 10 years of his wages to add a measured dose of powdered aconite root to a dish of preserved bamboo shoots. He was caught when a lady of brilliant deportment, jealous of Dongxian's sister, denounced him to the harem guards in the hope of incriminating a rival. The cook was strangled the same night in the back court. His name was struck from the household register. A scholar of the third rank, a man named Shifu Gong, was paid to draft a forged letter in Dongxian's hand, suggesting correspondence with a disgraced general posted to the northwest commandery of Anding. The letter was intercepted, examined by a calligraphy expert, and judged a forgery on the basis of a single misaligned hook in the character for command. Shifu Gong was exiled to the salt flats of Yanti. He died of pneumonia inside a year. A rumor was seeded through the wives of mid-rank officials that Dong's father, Dong Gong, was stockpiling crossbow bolts at his estate in Yunyang. An investigation was ordered to silence the rumor. The investigator found 17 bolts, the legal number for a household of his rank. Each plot failed. Each plot taught the next. Every meal in Dongxian's apartments was tested by 3 tasters in sequence. The third taster was always a boy under 12, on the theory that smaller bodies showed poison faster. Every new servant was vetted by his sister, the Zhaoyi, who interviewed each one personally in a windowless room behind the Hall of Eternal Trust. Every scroll that entered his rooms was unrolled first by a clerk whose own family was held as guarantee at a household in the eastern wards. Some of the boys from the Jade Workshop, now scattered through the inner palace as attendants, were turned into informants. They spied on each other in the corridors. They reported flickers of disloyalty in the angle of a bow, the length of a glance, the slowness of a hand reaching for a wine vessel. The ministers running these operations did not consider themselves traitors. They wrote, in private memorials that survive in fragmentary form in the Quanhan Wen, that they were physicians of the state. A growth had appeared on the throne. It was their duty to cut it away before the body of the empire failed. The history of court politics under the Han is one of the most ruthless subjects you can study. A misjudged phrase ended bloodlines. A single gift redirected the fate of the empire. To understand how this machinery actually worked, you have to go to the sources. The book at the core of today's investigation is one of the sharpest dissections of Han court politics ever written, and we have made it available to you right now through the View Products button on your screen. Click it. You will own the same source material that built this episode. We have also curated a small shelf of themed relics and dark memorabilia to sit beside it. I will not spoil the contents. Open the shelf. Look at what is waiting. Do it while the story keeps moving. The Emperor's devotion arrived at its breaking point in a private chamber, on an ordinary afternoon, during a nap. The episode is recorded in the Book of Han, Chapter 93. Emperor Ai woke before Dongxian and found that his favorite was sleeping on the long left sleeve of his imperial robe. The robe was yellow silk embroidered with the 12 symbols of imperial authority, including the sun, the moon, and the constellations of the northern sky. He did not want to disturb the boy. He took a small bronze knife from a side table and cut the sleeve off at the shoulder seam. The Chinese phrase that came out of this act, duan xiu, the cut sleeve, became the standard literary term for love between men in classical Chinese for the next 2,000 years. It appears in Tang poetry, in Ming drama, in Qing fiction. For the ministers in Sud BC, it was something else. It was the final reading on a gauge they had been watching for years. The Emperor of Han had taken a blade to the symbol of his own authority, rather than disturb the sleep of a courtier from Yunyang. The yellow silk of the imperial robe was, by ritual code in the Book of Rites, the body of the dynasty made into cloth. Cutting it was not a romantic gesture in the ritual reading. It was a violation. The act fell into the same category, technically, as defacing an altar. The court read the sign. Then the emperor coughed. It was a small thing, a dry catch in his chest during a morning audience in the hall of the front court. The sound was not loud. It did not echo against the high beams, but every official in the room caught it and stored it. Eyes flickered. First to the Son of Heaven on the dais, then to Dong Xian, standing on the platform to his right in his white silk and his tiger tally. It was the first crack in the pillar. Emperor Ai had been frail since taking the throne. He suffered from a condition the court physicians described as a wasting in the chest, with episodes of swelling in the legs that suggest, to modern readers of the Book of Han's medical sections, congestive heart failure. He was 25 years old that winter. The Empress Dowager Fu, his grandmother and the architect of his accession, had died in 2 BC. His mother Deng had died the year before. He had no son. He had no brother of marriageable age. He had only Dong Xian. From the morning of the cough, the court stopped watching the favorite. They began watching the emperor's breathing. They counted his sighs during audiences. They noted the pallor of his cheeks against the white lead powder he had begun to wear in heavier coats. They tracked the days between his attendances at the front court. By the 8th month of verse BC, he was attending only every 3rd audience. By the 9th month, every 5th. Wang Mang, exiled to his estate in Zhengde but not from his network, received daily reports from the palace. The reports were written in code on strips of bamboo no longer than a finger, hidden in the false bottoms of medicine baskets carried by a physician named Lu Hu, who made the journey under the cover of treating Wang Mang's mother. Lu Hu would be made a marquis within 5 years. In the Yiting harem, the women whose sons might inherit if Dongxian fell began to sharpen their alliances. Empress Dowager Wang, the senior dowager and aunt of Wang Mang, met privately with the imperial counselor Kong Guang on 3 occasions during this period. The meetings are recorded in the Book of Han, but their contents are not. Their consequences are. In the imperial secretariat, a list was being drawn up. The names on it would not be spoken aloud. Every man whose name appeared would die within a year of the emperor's last breath. Dong Gong was on the list. Dong Quanxin was on the list. The Zhao Yi was on the list. Dong Xian's name was at the top. The forbidden city filled with a slow, patient air. Servants began to move more carefully along the corridors. The eunuch Wu Hong, who had guarded the door, began to ask after the health of Wang Mang's mother. He was preparing his second face. The hunt had not yet begun. The hunters were taking their positions, and in his apartments built of cedar and gold, lit by lamps fed with whale oil shipped up from Donghai, Dong Xian, 22 years old, with no army of his own and no family powerful enough to shelter him, lay down beside the only person in the empire who could keep him alive. He listened to that person breathe in the dark. The breath caught twice between exhales. He did not know it yet, but the emperor's next cough would be louder, and it would come in the first month of the new year, and it would be the last sound the dynasty heard before the doors began to close. The emperor's body became the only clock in Chang'an. Every cough was a tick. Every fever night was a notch carved into the calendar of men waiting to act. The court did not pray for his recovery. The court counted his breaths. Generals who had not spoken in 5 years met in the back rooms of incense merchants near the Western Market on Anman Street. Old wives reopened correspondence with cousins they had cut off in their youth. The merchant district shut its doors an hour earlier each evening as winter closed in, and the lamps in the official quarters burned longer. Oil consumption in the palace, recorded in a fragmentary supply ledger preserved among the Yuan strips, rose by a fifth that season. The eunuch Wu Hong, who had once turned away ministers carrying flood reports, began to soften his posture in the antechamber. He bowed lower to Wang Mang's messengers than he did to Dong Xian's. He had not yet shifted his face publicly. He had shifted the angle of his spine, and the angle of a spine in the Han court was a document anyone trained to read could read. A predator does not announce itself. A predator selects its angle. Dongjian felt the shift in his skin before he understood it with his mind. The bows at morning audience had grown a fraction too deep. The smiles had grown a fraction too wide. The imperial counselor, Kong Guang, who had once avoided his eyes, now met them and held them. Kong Guang was a direct descendant of Confucius in the 14th generation. He had been removed from office once already, in 5 BC, for opposing the Dong family's elevation. He had been quietly restored. Dongxian was being measured. He was being fitted for absence. He had the emperor's love. Love is not an army. Love does not stop a blade in a corridor. He carried the golden tiger tally that could move 100,000 soldiers, and he understood, with a slow, cold clarity, that he had never been taught how to issue an order. He had been taught how to pour wine, how to tilt his head, how to fold his sleeves before kneeling. He was the most decorated man in the empire. He was alone. Emperor Ai of Han died on the 5th day of the 6th month of the 2nd year of the Yuanshu era, which corresponds to the summer of 1st Teil, or 1st BC, not winter, as later popular accounts sometimes claim. The Book of Han is specific. He died in the Hall of Eternal Trust, Weiyang Palace, at the hour of the rat, the first hour after midnight. He was 26 years old. He had ruled for 7 years. 3 senior physicians of the Yui school confirmed the death. Their names are recorded in the Imperial Archive. Liu Yu, Zhang An, and a third whose surname survives only as Master Cao. They placed a strip of raw silk over his nose and mouth, the standard test, and watched it for the span of 200 breaths. The silk did not stir. The news did not travel as grief. It traveled as a signal fire. Within the same hour that the physicians laid down their instruments, the palace shifted. The silence that had hung over the inner court for months broke into quiet, coordinated motion. Doors opened that had been closed for years. Doors closed that had stood open. Servants who answered to Wang Mang's network appeared at posts they had never held before. A man named Sun Chong, a junior eunuch from Wang Mang's household in Xindu, took position at the eastern gate of the inner palace. He had walked that route in his sleep for weeks, rehearsing. The architect of the operation was not in the bedchamber. She was across the walled road, in her apartments at Changle Palace, on the eastern side of the imperial city, separated from Weiyang by the long ceremonial avenue called the Imperial Way. The Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun, born in 71 BC in the village of Yuancheng in Wei Commandery, widow of Emperor Yuan, mother of Emperor Cheng, aunt of Wang Mang, survivor of 4 reigns. The Book of Han devotes a full chapter to her biography, chapter 98, written by Ban Gu with a precision that suggests he had access to her household records. She was 70 years old that summer. Her eyesight had begun to fail. Her hands trembled when she lifted a cup. She had to be helped to her feet by 2 attendants. Her mind did not waver. She had been waiting for this night since the death of Emperor Cheng in 7 BC, when the throne had passed sideways into the Fu clan, and her own family had been pushed to the margins. She had spent 7 years watching from the outer apartments of Changle Palace, eating plain millet, refusing the silk gifts sent by Empress Dowager Fu, building a network through cousins, through her brother's sons, through old palace women who remembered her from earlier reigns. Her first order, given before the body of Emperor Ai had cooled, was not for incense or mourning robes or the summoning of astrologers. It was for the imperial seals. She sent her personal attendant, a woman named Liang, across the imperial way to Weiyang Palace with a single instruction. Take the seals into custody. All 6 of them. The seal of the emperor for heaven, the seal for the earth, the seal for the people, and the 3 administrative seals used for civil, military, and ritual edicts. The seals were kept in a lacquered case of cedar lined with red silk, in the chamber adjacent to the bedchamber, guarded by 2 palace attendants and a senior eunuch. Liang arrived with 4 armed women of the Grand Empress Dowager's household and a written order sealed with Wang Zhengjun's personal mark. The senior eunuch on duty was a man named Shi Li, who had served Emperor Ai for 6 years. He examined the seal. He looked at the 4 armed women. He looked at the corridor behind them, which had filled, in the last quarter of an hour, with men he did not recognize. He handed over the case. Without the seals, no edict was valid. No order could be issued in the name of the state. The bureaucracy of the empire, a machine of 230,000 registered officials, froze in place. The only person who could thaw it was the woman who now held the cedar case in her lap in Changal Palace. This was the masterstroke. It was performed in under an hour. The cost was 0 lives. Wang Mang received word at his residence near the Imperial Park, on the southwestern edge of the city. He had returned to the capital 3 months earlier under a quiet recall. His exile in Xindu officially ended after a delegation of more than 100 senior officials petitioned for his return. He had used the months to renew old contacts and place trusted men in positions near the inner palace. He read his aunt's message by lamplight in his study. He nodded once. He set the bamboo strip face down on his desk. He put on the robes of a high official, dark blue with black trim, without the regalia of any specific office. He took no escort larger than 4 men. He walked through the moonlit streets of the inner city to the residence of Dong Xian on the eastern slope of Mount Li. The Mount Li residence had been under construction for 2 years. It was not yet complete. The main hall was finished. The mirror pavilion was finished. The outer wings were still being tiled. Scaffolding stood along the southern wall. The smell of fresh lacquer hung in the corridors. The confrontation was not a battle. It was a closing of a door. Dongxian was in the main hall when Wang Mang arrived. He had not yet been formally told of the emperor's death, but he had been told enough. A messenger from the palace had reached him 3 hours earlier. He had not changed out of the regalia he had worn at the previous day's audience. The black robe with vermilion trim of the Dasima, the golden tiger tally at his belt, his hair pinned with the jade of his marquisate. The bronze mirror walls of the pavilion threw back 100 reflections of him from every angle. The hall was lit by 16 bronze lamps, fed with whale oil shipped from the eastern coast. Around him stood his attendants, the boys from the jade workshop he had taken into his household, dressed in matching silk. None of them spoke. None of them moved closer to him than 3 paces. Wang Mang entered through the southern door. He did not bow. He delivered the news of the emperor's death in 3 sentences. He named the time. He named the place. He named the attending physicians. Then he delivered the order of the Grand Empress Dowager. Dongxian was stripped of the office of Dasima. He was stripped of the title Marquis of Gaoan. He was to surrender the tiger tally and the seal of his office at once. The order was witnessed by Wang Mang's 4 men and by the 4 armed guards now standing at the doors of the hall, who had replaced Dongxian's own guards during the previous watch. Dongxian opened his mouth. The years of training had taught him 1,000 gestures. None of them fit this moment. He could pour wine without a sound. He could recite the lineage of every emperor since the founding of the Han in 202 BC. He could name every constellation on the ceiling of the Hall of the Opening Lotus. He could not summon a single phrase to answer the man standing in front of him. He looked toward the door. The guards at the door were not his guards. They had been replaced sometime during the previous night, under orders that had passed through Wu Hong's hand. He looked at the tally on his belt. The metal was warm from his body. The tally moved armies only when the man wearing it had the authority to be obeyed. He had no such authority. The authority had died with the man who breathed it into him at the hour of the rat. His legs gave out. He went down onto the polished wood of his own floor. The sound that left him was not a protest. It was the sound of a child who has woken up alone in a dark room. The reflections in the bronze walls multiplied it into a chorus. The boys from the Jade Workshop did not move. They had been trained in the cold halls of their making not to react to sounds of distress. The training held. Wang Mang stood with his hands inside his sleeves. He waited. His face showed nothing. He was 45 years old. He had been preparing for this moment in one form or another since he was a boy of 17, reading the Confucian classics in his uncle's library. When the sobbing had reduced itself to breathing, he gave a small nod to one of his attendants. The attendant stepped forward and unhooked the golden tiger tally from Dong Xian's belt. The tally was placed in a wooden box that had been brought for the purpose. The box was closed. Wang Mang walked out without another word. The hall behind him was silent except for the breathing of the boys who had not been given permission to leave their positions. That night, in the hours before dawn on the 6th day of the 6th month, Dong Xian and his wife took their own lives in the back chamber of the residence. The Book of Han records the deaths in a single sentence. The methods are not given. Court rumor preserved in later commentaries names poison, specifically a draught of aconite root prepared by a household physician who survived only long enough to deliver it. His wife is not named in the official record. She was the daughter of an official named Bao Xuan, a man who had once submitted a memorial criticizing the marriage itself. Suicide was not an escape. The state had not finished. Wang Mang's officers entered the residence before sunrise. Dongxian's body was found in the inner chamber, laid out on a low bed of dark wood. He had been buried provisionally that same morning by his own household in a hastily prepared chamber within the residence grounds in a jade burial suit, a yuxia, of the type reserved for the highest princes of the imperial family. The suit was made of more than 2,000 plaques of nephrite jade from Khotan in the western regions. Each plaque was rectangular, ground to a thickness of 2 millimeters, drilled at each corner. They had been stitched together with gold wire of the second grade. The honor of being buried in such a suit was, by the ritual code preserved in the rites of Zhou and reaffirmed under Emperor Wu, granted only by direct imperial edict. The officers were given a single instruction by Wang Mang himself. They opened the temporary tomb. They lifted the suit from the body. They cut the gold thread plaque by plaque. They did not work quickly. The work took most of the morning. The plaques fell on the stone floor, and some of them broke. The gold wire was collected separately, weighed, and returned to the imperial treasury as recovered state property. The body underneath was exposed to the early summer air. It was thin. The face was unrecognizable. This was not desecration for its own sake. It was statement. The state was revoking, in public ritual, every honor the dead emperor had granted to his favorite. The revocation extended past death, into the afterlife. into the protection the jade was believed to provide against the dispersal of the Han and Po souls. The corpse was loaded onto a cart and driven to the prison ground outside the eastern wall, beyond the Bachengmen Gate. It was dropped into an unmarked pit alongside the bodies of executed criminals. The pit was filled with quicklime by the afternoon. Then the campaign turned outward through the family. Donggong, his father, was arrested at his estate in Yunyang and executed within the month. Dong Quanxin, his brother, was arrested in his quarters within the imperial city and executed at the same time. The Zhaoyi, his sister, was demoted from her rank in the harem on the day after her brother's death and exiled to a remote household in the commandery of Xian, where she died within a year under conditions that are not specified in the surviving records. The household physician who had administered the poison was executed at the Eastern Market. The Bao family, his wife's clan, was investigated. Bao Xuan was spared on the grounds that he had openly opposed the marriage. Within 3 years, Bao Xuan would commit suicide in prison after being implicated in a separate political case under Wang Mang's regency. Cousins of the Dong clan were stripped of property and relocated to the salt commanderies of the far southwest, Yueshi and Zhengde. The clan registry in Yunyang was struck through with a single line of red ink. The county magistrate who supervised the striking was promoted within the year. The estate was inventoried over the course of 11 days by a team of 43 clerks from the Ministry of Finance. The household goods of Dongxian were valued at 4.3 billion cash coins, a figure preserved in Chapter 93 of the Book of Han. The number represented an amount close to a third of the annual revenue of the empire. The wealth was returned to the state treasury at Chang'an. The bronze mirrors of the Mount Li Pavilion were pried from the walls and melted down for coinage at the imperial mint at Shanglin. The whale oil in the lamps was redistributed to the palace household. The Mount Li residence itself was demolished. The site was leveled. By the 3rd year of the new era, the ground had been planted with mulberry. The cauterization was complete in under 60 days. To understand that this was protocol and not personal vengeance, the court only had to recall the precedent of Tong, set more than a century and a half earlier. When Emperor Wen died in the 6th month of 157 BC, his son Emperor Jing took the throne with a long memory. He had never approved of his father's favorite. He had been forced, as a young prince, to share his father's attention with a boatman. He did not order an execution. That would have been a small revenge. He recalled the prophecy. The physiognomist Xu Fu had read Deng Tong's face decades earlier in the imperial pavilion and pronounced that he would die of starvation. Emperor Jing decided to deliver the prophecy himself as a piece of state policy. He stripped Deng Tong of his rank. He repossessed the Copper Mountain at Yandao in the commandery of Shu. He sealed the mints with imperial wax. He confiscated the estate down to the kitchen vessels, the rice jars, the lampstands, the wooden combs in the women's quarters. Then he issued an edict, quiet and final, prohibiting any person in the empire from giving Deng Tong food, water, or shelter, on pain of confiscation of property and exile to the frontier. The edict was not posted publicly. It was circulated through the bureaucracy. It was understood. Deng Tong, who had once minted his own currency from a private mountain, walked the streets of Chang'an with no coat. He had been a man of moderate height, with delicate hands and a soft voice. The hands cracked from cold. The voice failed within weeks. The people who had bowed to him a year before stepped around him without lifting their eyes. They had been told what the law required. He slept under the eaves of warehouses in the southern wards near the city wall. He scavenged peelings from refuse pits behind cookshops. In the second month, after a snowfall, he was found shivering in an alley by a former servant of his household, a man named Zhao, who recognized him only by the scar on his left wrist. Zhao did not stop. Zhao could not stop. The edict held. A relative, a cousin's wife whose name does not survive, left a single bowl of cold millet at the entrance of an alley where she knew Tong slept. She set it down at dusk. She did not stay to watch him eat. She returned to her household before her husband noticed her absence. Tong was found 3 days later near the bowl, his right hand stretched toward it, fingers curled. The bowl was untouched. He had been too weak in the last hours to lift it. His body was removed by the night watch and buried in the common ground outside the southern wall. The prophecy had been kept by the state. This was the message the Han court read and reread across the generations. The natural order will be restored. The cost of disturbing it will be absolute. The favorite will not be allowed to outlive his protector by more than a season. The instruments of state are patient. They wait. They do not forgive. The boys from the Jade workshop, scattered across the inner palace at the moment of Xian's fall, did not survive in any organized number. Some were assigned to junior princes. Some were sold into provincial households. Some were quietly disposed of by the new administration, which considered them politically contaminated. The Jade workshop itself was closed within 2 years. The compound was sold to a minor noble who turned it into a horse farm. The koi pond was drained and filled. They were never the masters of the game. They were the pieces, polished, painted, fitted into a board they had not been taught to read. They were forged in cold halls by women with bamboo canes and men with bronze mirrors. They were sharpened by lead and silence and hunger. They were placed beside the throne as a weapon aimed by one man at his own ministers. A weapon belongs to the hand that wields it. When the hand goes still, the weapon becomes evidence. They were designed to be adored by one person, and for that reason, they were guaranteed to be destroyed by every other person in the room. Their elevation was a private fantasy. Their elimination was administrative routine. The bureaucracy that buried them was the same bureaucracy that had inventoried them on the day they entered the palace gates. It opened a file. It closed a file. It moved on to the next dossier. Wang Mang would govern as regent through the brief reign of Emperor Ping, then the infant Emperor Ruzi Ying, before formally taking the throne himself in AD 9, ending the Western Han Dynasty after 210 years. He founded the short-lived Xian Dynasty. The technique he had learned on the night Emperor Ai died, the seizure of the seals from a still warm bedchamber, became the operating principle of his entire political life. He never forgot it. The empire never recovered from it. Thank you for staying with this story to the last sentence. Your time is what allows us to keep going into these corners of the past. If the work meant something to you, subscribe, leave a like, and send the video to someone who refuses the polished version of history. You have just watched another premium documentary by Ancestral, your ultimate history hub on YouTube. Look at the screen now. The next investigation is already waiting for you, and it picks up the thread from where this one ended. Click it. Open the next door. The descent continues.